He played the most despised style in the sport. Behind-the-back dribbles, no-look passes. Every coach who handled him called him a showboat. And in 1950, the most fundamentals-obsessed coach in basketball held the first pick in the draft, looked at the local kid Boston was screaming for, and passed on him on purpose. Then told the newspapers why. His name was Bob Cousy. In this video, how Red Auerbach's contempt for flash collided with the one player who broke the rule, and why the man who called him a yokel spent his life calling him the greatest ever. Reinhardt ran a fast break in an era when most college teams walked the ball up the floor like they were carrying groceries. Auerbach later said his concepts were 15 years ahead of their time. 3 attackers charging at 2 back-pedaling defenders. Numbers, geometry, pressure applied before the defense could organize. Auerbach absorbed it completely and never stopped crediting Reinhardt for it as long as he lived. So here's the first thing that gets missed about Red Auerbach. He was not a slow-it-down coach. He wanted the ball pushed. He wanted it pushed harder than anyone else in the sport wanted it pushed. What he hated was waste. His entire philosophy came down to one question, applied to every action on a basketball floor. Did it produce a basket or a reaction from the crowd? A basket was basketball. A reaction was vaudeville. And vaudeville didn't show up in the standings. He coached at St. Albans School in Washington, then Roosevelt High, where he also taught history and hygiene. Then the Navy, where he coached the team at Norfolk and caught the eye of a millionaire named Mike Uline. Uline hired him to run the Washington Capitals in the brand new Basketball Association of America. Auerbach was 29. He built a fast-breaking team around Bones McKinney and a pile of ex-Navy players and went 49-11 in year 1. Best record in the league. Then lost in the playoffs, a theme that would haunt him for a decade. 2 more seasons in Washington. Then 1 miserable year with the Tri-Cities Blackhawks. A franchise stretched across Molina and Rock Island in Illinois and Davenport in Iowa, where he and owner Ben Kerner fought constantly. And then, in the spring of 1950, Walter Brown hired him to coach the Boston Celtics. Understand what Brown was handing him. The Celtics had never had a winning season. Not one. In 4 years of existence, they had finished under .500 every single time. And 1949 into 1950 was the worst of all. A 22-46 disaster that landed them dead last in the Eastern Division of the newly formed National Basketball Association. Bad enough to get the first pick in the draft. And Boston knew exactly what it wanted done with that pick. Because 40 miles west, in Worcester, Massachusetts, there was a kid who had been the most exciting basketball player in New England for 4 straight years. And his story is, in almost every particular, the exact opposite of Red Auerbach's. Robert Joseph Cousy was born in August of 1928 in New York City, into a family of French immigrants living in a cold water flat. French was his first language. He learned English on the street, with a speech impediment that turned his R sounds into L sounds, which is why the other kids called him Flenchy. A poor kid in a hard household. He escaped onto the concrete, and he was not, at first, any good. He didn't pick up a basketball until he was about 13. He tried out at Andrew Jackson High School in Queens and was cut. He kept playing in a local league sponsored by the Long Island Press. He tried out again the next year. Cut again. Then the accident that changed basketball history. He fell out of a tree and broke his right arm. Think about what that means for a kid whose entire identity is wrapped up in a game he isn't even good at yet. His shooting hand is gone. His dribbling hand is gone. Most kids stop. Cousy didn't. He started doing everything left-handed. Dribbling, shooting, passing. He had no other option, so he built a second hand from scratch. By the time the cast came off, he was effectively ambidextrous. He later called the broken arm a fortunate event. And he was right, because that is where the entire Cousy toolkit comes from. A player who can go either direction doesn't have to telegraph. A player who can finish with either hand doesn't have to square up. Every trick he ever performed rests on that foundation. A high school coach named Lou Drummond saw him in a press league game and noticed what nobody else had. He needed a playmaking guard. He invited Cousy back. Within a year and a half on varsity, the kid who'd been cut twice was the most talked about high school player in New York City. As a senior, he won the city scoring title with 26 points in his final game. His parents wanted a Catholic college, so in September of 1946, he enrolled at Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and immediately ran into the problem that would define the next 15 years of his life. His coaches hated the way he played. Alvin Julian, known as Doggy, ran a platoon system, and Cousy came off the bench as a freshman. That team, the 1947 Crusaders, won the NCAA championship, beating Oklahoma in the final at Madison Square Garden. First New England school ever to win it. And Cousy was a role player on it. He won a starting spot as a sophomore and put up better than 16 a game. Julian still limited his minutes because Julian looked at the behind-the-back dribbles and the no-look passes and saw one thing: showboating. There were stretches where the coach reportedly wouldn't speak to him at all. Cousy got so frustrated he considered transferring to St. John's. In one of the great ironies of the sport, the man who talked him out of it was Joe Lapchick, the coach at St. John's. And then came the Loyola game. Holy Cross had a rickety little gym, so the big games got played at Boston Garden. Against Loyola of Chicago, with about 5 minutes left and Holy Cross trailing, Cousy sat on the bench where his coach had parked him. And the Garden crowd started chanting. They wanted Cousy. It got loud enough that Julian had no real choice. Cousy went in. In those 5 minutes he produced 12 points, beat a much bigger defender with a behind-the-back dribble, and dropped a left-handed hook to win it. That's where the legend detonates. Not the points, the sequence. The crowd demanded him over the objection of his own coach, and he validated them instantly, using the exact move his coach had benched him for. Boston's lesson was that Cousy was magic, and the men in charge were fools. The men in charge concluded they'd gotten lucky and wouldn't get lucky again. By his senior year, under new coach Buster Sheary, Holy Cross ripped off 26 straight, and Cousy was a first-team All-American. 6'1", 175 pounds, enormous hands, freakish peripheral vision, and a following in New England that bordered on religious. So in April of 1950, with the first pick in the NBA draft, sitting in Boston with an empty arena and a franchise that had never won anything, Red Auerbach did what he thought was the only professional thing to do. He took a center, Charlie Scher, 6'11", Bowling Green, a big man, and then the newspapers came for him, and Auerbach gave them the line that would follow him for the rest of his life. He told them the Celtics needed a big man. He said little men were a dime a dozen, and then he asked whether he was supposed to win here or go after local yokels. Local yokels, about a first-team All-American, about the most popular athlete in New England, in the city he'd just been hired to work in front of a fan base that had waited 4 years for something to cheer about. The press annihilated him. And the thing you have to sit with is that Auerbach wasn't bluffing or posturing. Years later, he explained the reasoning without a trace of apology. He said he needed a big man and that you could never be sure about backcourt men in that league. He even said he figured he could take the big man and, if he wanted, trade Scher for Cousy and another player later. Big men were leverage, guards were interchangeable, and in fairness, look at the league he was operating in. George Mikan was the sport. 6'10", glasses, unstoppable, the closest thing professional basketball had to a national attraction. If you didn't have size, you didn't have a season. That was the consensus, and Auerbach didn't invent it. He wasn't alone on Cousy either. Other scouts saw flamboyant. They saw ineffective. One professional scout's evaluation in 1950 was that the first time Cousy tried that fancy stuff at this level, they'd cram the ball down his throat. Auerbach was simply the only man arrogant enough to say it into a microphone in the middle of Boston. And here's the part everybody forgets. In that same draft, Auerbach and Walter Brown spent a pick on Chuck Cooper of Duquesne, the first black player ever drafted into the NBA. When the room raised eyebrows, Brown made it clear he didn't care what color Cooper was. The man being torched in the papers for ignoring the local hero had just done something no franchise in the league had been willing to do. Auerbach didn't care about popularity. He cared about winning, and his theory of winning said big. So the local yokel went into the pool and in the first round was taken by the Tri-Cities Blackhawks. Some accounts put him third overall, some fourth. It made no difference for one simple reason. Bob Cousy had no intention of going, and that's where this stops being about a coach's stubbornness and becomes something much stranger. Because over the next 5 months, a series of accidents were about to hand Red Auerbach the exact player he had publicly refused, and there was nothing he could do about it. Cousy looked at a franchise spread across Moline, Rock Island, and Davenport and saw nothing he wanted. He was a New York kid who'd made his name in New England. He had a life in Worcester, a stake in a gas station, a driving school. He was not a man with no options. So he told the Blackhawks his number. $10,000. Ben Kerner, the same owner Red Auerbach had spent a season fighting with in Tri-Cities, came back with $6,000. Cousy refused to report. Sit with the absurdity. The best guard prospect in America was prepared to walk away from professional basketball at 22 over $4,000 because teaching people to parallel park in central Massachusetts paid better and let him sleep in his own bed. So Kerner moved the asset. Cousy's rights got shipped to the Chicago Stags. Cousy didn't change his mind. He had no more interest in Chicago than he'd had in Moline. And then, on September 25, 1950, the Chicago Stags folded. Gone. Weeks before the season started, an entire franchise evaporated and left a roster of professional basketball players in the league's lap, with nowhere to go, so the NBA scheduled a dispersal draft for October 5th to divide up the bodies. Most of it went smoothly. Larry Foss to Fort Wayne, Cleggy Hermson to Tri-Cities. Business as usual. Then it came down to 3 names and 3 teams, and the whole thing seized up. The 3 players left were Max Zaslavsky, Andy Phillip, and Bob Cousy. The 3 men in the room were Walter Brown of the Celtics, Ned Irish of the Knicks, and Eddie Gottlieb of the Warriors. All 3 wanted Zaslavsky. Not Cousy, Zaslavsky, a 4-time All-Star, a proven professional scorer, a known quantity. Phillip was the clear second choice, a veteran guard with a track record. And Cousy was the leftover, the third name, the one nobody was fighting over. Understand how completely that inverts what we think we know. In our version of history, Bob Cousy is the crown jewel of the 1950s NBA. In the actual room, 3 owners argued themselves to a standstill over the right not to end up with him. Nobody budged. So the NBA president, Maurice Podoloff, ended it the only way it could be ended. He wrote the 3 names down and put them in a hat. Accounts differ on the order of the draw. Some have the Knicks pulling first. A 1953 account has Brown reaching in first. Nobody disputes the result. Irish got Zaslavsky, Gottlieb got Phillip, and Walter Brown pulled out a slip of paper with the name of the greatest guard in the history of the sport written on it. And his reaction was not joy. Brown said later that when he drew Cousy, he could have fallen to the floor. He admitted he'd been hoping for Zaslavsky, could have tolerated Phillip, and did not want Cousy. He said he thought he'd gotten stung. He'd had a belly full of hometown heroes because Boston had already tried this. They'd picked up half of that great 1947 Holy Cross team, and it hadn't worked. So the Celtics gave Bob Cousy $9,000, $1,000 less than he'd demanded from Tri-Cities, and put him in a uniform. The most beloved athlete in New England arrived at the only franchise in New England as a consolation prize. 2 other owners had tried to avoid, drawn out of a hat by an owner who described the moment as nearly falling down. And then he had to go meet his coach. There was no reconciliation scene, no closing of the circle. Auerbach looked at the kid the entire city had spent 6 months screaming for and told him roughly that he wasn't a big man, that he hoped he made the team, but if he didn't, not to come blaming Auerbach for it, because it was a big man's game. Read that again. He told a first-team All-American that he hoped he'd make the roster. That's the relationship at hour zero. And it matters because everything Bob Cousy accomplished over the next 13 years, he accomplished for a man who started by telling him he might not be good enough to be there. So what did the yokel do? He nearly broke the franchise open in a single season. The 1950 into 1951 Celtics went 39-30. First winning record in the history of the organization. Ed McCauley, picked out of the wreckage of the St. Louis Bombers, poured in better than 20 a game. And the 22-year-old rookie averaged 15.6 points, 6.9 rebounds, and 4.9 assists, made the All-Star team, and did something no Celtic had ever done. He filled the building. That is what the numbers do not capture. Boston Garden had been a place where hockey happened. Cousy turned Celtics games into an event, almost single-handedly, because people would pay to see what he might do with a basketball that night. He dribbled, passed, scampered, improvised. He made the pro game look worth watching in a league still fighting for oxygen against college basketball and the Harlem Globetrotters. Walter Brown stopped talking about falling to the floor. And Red Auerbach was still not impressed with the flair. This is the part that gets flattened in the retelling. People want the story to be that Cousy played one great season and Auerbach threw up his hands and converted. Not what happened. Auerbach acknowledged the production. He wasn't blind. But the argument didn't end. It went on for years, in public, and both men held their ground. Auerbach's position was elegant and on its face unanswerable. He said the criterion of a great passer is the completion of the pass. That's the whole doctrine in 11 words. Not the difficulty, not the beauty, not the noise the building makes. Did it arrive? Because a pass that doesn't arrive isn't a pass, it's a turnover with better publicity. And here's why that argument had teeth in 1951. Cousy's passes weren't just fancy, they were fast, and they came from angles nobody had ever thrown from, which meant half the time they hit his own teammates in the face. A behind-the-back feed to a man who isn't expecting one is not a highlight. It's an assault. So Auerbach had the facts, and Cousy's answer has to be one of the great replies in the history of the sport, because he didn't argue with the doctrine. He accepted it, then turned it around. His response was that once a man had played with him for a few weeks, there was no excuse for him being fooled. Do you see what he did? He agreed the pass has to be completed. He refused to accept that the burden of completion sat entirely with the passer. If the ball arrives where it should, and your teammate isn't ready, the problem isn't the pass. The problem is your teammate hasn't caught up. Give him a few weeks, that's not showboating, that's a demand. Cousy was telling his coach that the standard of the sport was too low and that he wasn't going to lower himself to it. Two men. Same religion. Total disagreement about the liturgy. Auerbach wanted the fast break, and Cousy was the greatest fast break engine anyone had ever seen. They agreed on where the ball should go. They could not agree on how it was allowed to get there. For 2.5 years, the argument sat unresolved. Cousy piled up numbers. Auerbach kept the leash on. The Celtics won enough to be interesting and never enough to matter. Until one night in March of 1953, when Red Auerbach was handed a problem that his own doctrine couldn't solve, and he did the one thing he had spent 3 years refusing to do. He put the ball in Bob Cousy's hands and told everybody else to get out of the way. The date was March 21st, 1953. Boston Garden, Game 2 of the Eastern Division semi-finals against the Syracuse Nationals, the Celtics' most hated rival. Win it and Boston takes the series, the first playoff series victory in franchise history. It became one of the most deranged basketball games ever played. No shot clock. A personal rivalry between Cousy and Syracuse's Paul Seymour that Auerbach later said involved Seymour playing it rough with Cousy no matter how loudly the coach complained and officials calling everything. By the end, it produced 106 personal fouls. 12 players fouled out. 2 more got thrown out. Players fought players and, at one point, tangled with police. 3 hours and 11 minutes, 4 overtimes, and Bob Cousy, playing on a bad leg, had 7 points at halftime. 7. Here's what happened next. Auerbach, the man who thought little guards were a dime a dozen, made a decision that violated everything he had preached to this player since the day he met him. He ordered his team to put the ball in Cousy's hands and leave it there. Let him dribble. Let him improvise. Let him hold it until somebody fouled him, which meant the offense was no longer a system. It was one small man's hands and one small man's imagination. And the Celtics season now depended on whether the fancy stuff worked under maximum pressure against a team that wanted to hurt him. It worked. Cousy scored 25 in regulation and tied it at 77 with a free throw in the closing seconds. First overtime, 6 of Boston's 9 points, including another game-tying free throw in the final seconds. Second overtime, all 4 of the Celtics' points. He also had a layup to win it and missed the rim completely. He admitted afterward he could have been the GOAT. Dolph Schayes of Syracuse said it just proved he was human. Third overtime, 8 points, including a 25-foot game-tying push shot with 3 seconds on the clock. Fourth overtime, Chuck Cooper fouled out. Syracuse ripped off 5 straight and led 104-99 with 3.5 minutes left. And Cousy drew a foul, made the free throw, tipped in a miss seconds later, stole a Syracuse pass, and scored on a left-handed backhanded layup. Tied at 104. Boston won it 111-105. The final line is one of the strangest in the history of the sport. 50 points, 10 field goals, 30 free throws made on 32 attempts. He shattered George Mikan's playoff scoring record of 47 and obliterated Mikan's playoff free throw record of 17. 66 minutes on the floor, 50 points on 10 field goals, because his coach told him to dribble until somebody hit him, and then he made everything. And that's the conversion, right there, not in a press conference, not in an apology, in a decision. Because what Red Auerbach did that night was concede the argument, not the doctrine never changed. The pass still had to be completed. But Auerbach had spent 3 years believing the flash was decoration sitting on top of the basketball. And on March 21st, 1953, with his season in the balance, he bet everything on the proposition that the flash was the basketball. He put the ball in the yokels' hands because there was nothing else in the building that could win that game. And here's the thing about Red Auerbach. Once he was persuaded by evidence, he did not go backwards. Ed Macaulay said it as well as anybody. He said Red was never one to second-guess himself or admit he'd made a mistake, but that even Red would have to admit Cousy wasn't exactly some local yokel. So Auerbach did what great coaches do with an argument they've lost. He absorbed it and built on top of it. What emerged over the next decade wasn't Auerbach's system, with Cousy grudgingly tolerated inside it. It was a synthesis. Auerbach supplied the framework, the conditioning, the discipline, the relentless insistence on the break. Cousy supplied what it had always been missing, a player capable of executing it at the speed it theoretically allowed. Reinhardt's 3-on-2 finally had a set of hands good enough to run it, and Auerbach never stopped coaching him. That's the other half of it, and Cousy always admitted it. The defensive weaknesses got corrected, the shot selection got cleaned up. A writer covering him in 1953 noted that under Auerbach's sharp coaching, Cousy had become one of the best feeders in the business, and that even though he was still razzle-dazzle, he never did tricks purely to attract attention. That's the whole story in a sentence. The tricks stayed. The purposelessness left. The results came fast. In 1952, the Celtics added Bill Sharman, and Cousy had a partner who could punish a defense that collapsed on him. In 1952 into 1953, he won the first of 8 straight assist titles at 7.7 a game, an absurd number in a league with no shot clock. He won it every season through 1960, 10 straight years of first-team All-Star, 13 All-Star selections in 13 seasons, All-Star Game MVP in 1954 and 1957, and still no championship, because the maddening thing is that Auerbach's original argument was half right. The Celtics scored, they filled the garden, they could not get a stop, and could not get the ball off the defensive glass, which meant the greatest fast break trigger in basketball spent half his career waiting for someone to hand him the ball. Red needed a big man. He'd been right about that in 1950. He'd just been wrong about the price. And in 1956, he went and got one. Auerbach had a network of coaches and former players feeding him reports on a center out of San Francisco. Every report came back the same. When he heard one coach dismiss the kid's professional prospects, Auerbach announced loudly that the man was full of it. Cousy remembered Red telling him around then that he thought he was getting a guy who would change things. Rochester held the first pick and had no interest in a big man. St. Louis held the second, and Ben Kerner wanted stars to keep his franchise alive. So Auerbach called the man he'd feuded with in Tri-Cities and offered Ed McCauley, a St. Louis native who wanted to be near his sick son. Kerner asked for Cliff Hagan too. Auerbach agreed. Bill Russell became a Celtic. With the 13th pick, Boston took his college teammate K.C. Jones. Now watch what happens. Russell rebounds, blocks, intimidates, and refuses to shoot. Cousy runs. That's the dynasty. The greatest defensive rebounder alive, turning misses into outlet passes, and the greatest open floor passer alive, turning outlet passes into layups. Reinhardt's 3-on-2, finally, at full velocity, 60 times a night. In Russell's rookie year, Boston went 44-28, best record in the league. Cousy led the NBA in assists at 7.5, finished 8th in scoring at 20.6, and was named Most Valuable Player. Then the Celtics beat the St. Louis Hawks in 7 games for the first championship in franchise history. The man Red Auerbach didn't want was the most valuable player of the league and the captain of the first Celtics title team. They lost the 1958 finals with Russell hurt. Then they won 5 straight. 1959, 1960, 1961, 1962, 1963, 6 rings in 7 seasons for Cousy, and the beginning of the most dominant run in the history of American team sports. But if you're waiting for the part where Red Auerbach softens and tells Bob Cousy he loves him, it doesn't arrive, and that's important. Auerbach never became a warm man. Cousy was blunt about it for the rest of his life. Asked how Auerbach handled the integration of the Celtics, Cousy's answer was that Arnold deserved credit for it, because he handled it easily by treating everybody exactly the same. Badly, that's the joke, and it's also the operating manual. Auerbach was not kind to Cousy. He was not kind to Russell or Sharman or Heinsohn or anybody else. What he was fair. In the narrow and brutal way fairness sometimes shows up. One standard applied to everyone, regardless of where you were from or what the newspapers thought. There was one small tell, though. Cousy was one of the very few people Red Auerbach allowed to call him Arnold. And in 1963, the argument that started in 1950 got its verdict. Cousy was 34. Sports Illustrated ran a piece on the eve of the playoffs, calling the Celtics an old team with tired blood in their varicose veins. He still ranked 3rd in the league in assists. K.C. Jones was already being groomed to replace him. That November, a writer walked into the Boston locker room before a game against the Warriors. Cousy hadn't arrived. Auerbach was sitting alone, reading his mail. The writer asked him about Cousy, and Red Auerbach, who 13 years earlier had informed the city of Boston that he was supposed to win rather than go after local yokels, asked what a man was supposed to say when he knew he was about to lose the greatest backcourt man who ever lived. He said nobody would ever take his place. He said there was only one Cousy. Then he tossed the letter on the desk. leaned back and started talking about how the guy was 34 and still playing as well as he ever had, how he came to play, how he never loafed, how he wanted to win now more than ever. That is Red Auerbach eating a plate of crow and enjoying every bite of it. On March 17, 1963, the Celtics held Bob Cousy's farewell at the Garden before the final regular season game. He stood on the floor with his family and tried to read a speech he'd written out in advance, because he knew he wouldn't be able to improvise it. He got as far as saying he'd been asked all year what he would miss most about no longer playing, and then he broke. The building broke with him. Men and women wept openly. Somewhere in that noise, a voice came out of the crowd telling him they loved him, and the place came apart. He composed himself long enough to thank the fans of New England, to say he only hoped his playing had in some small way repaid their kindness. Then he sat down and cried on the bench. Boston Garden was not a sentimental room. That night it was nothing else. Then he went out and won the thing. Boston beat Cincinnati in the Eastern Finals and met the Lakers, taking 3 of the first 4. In Game 5 at home, Cousy fouled out and Los Angeles survived. Game 6 in Los Angeles, Boston led by 9 early in the 4th, and then Cousy tripped, sprained his left ankle, and had to come off. The Lakers cut it to 1. He came back with 5 minutes left, got the offense functioning, and in the last 2 minutes did the thing he'd been doing since he was a kid with a broken arm in Queens. He handled the ball and made a professional team look foolish trying to take it, killing the clock until they had no choice but to foul. Boston won 112-109, 5th straight title, 6th for Cousy. He walked off the floor a champion in his last game as a Celtic. So what did Red Auerbach actually change his mind about? Not Flash. He never made peace with Flash. Right to the end of his life, he preached fundamentals, disciplined passing, rebounding, unselfish play, the things he called timeless. He wrote books about it. He gave a generation of kids their footwork on television. What changed was narrower than that and more interesting. In 1950, Auerbach believed spectacle and function were opposites, that the fancy pass was by definition the pass that failed, that a player who entertained had stopped trying to win because nobody could possibly be doing both at once. Bob Cousy proved they weren't opposites. They were the same act, done by someone good enough. The behind-the-back dribble wasn't a trick sitting on top of the play. Like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of the game. Until next time.